question and answer with students. So if you could go ahead and save your questions for the end, that would be great. Feel free to turn your cameras on for the session. Jeanette would love to see who's here, and prepare some questions for the end so we can have a pretty casual, interactive session. So Jeanette currently serves as the Director and Chief Executive Officer of Pet RX, Pet Care RX, sorry about that.
No problem.
An e-commerce pet pharmacy that sells pet medication supplies and food directly to customers. From 1977 to 1994, Ms. Loeb was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, where she served as the head of the structured finance department in the United States. Ms. Loeb was named the first woman partner at Goldman Sachs in 1986 and served in that role from 1986 to 1994. She has an MBA from Harvard Business School. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Wellesley College, no big deal. Got her BA in economics. She has served on many boards over her career. She currently serves on the board of the AllianceBernstein Mutual Fund Complex and the Apollo Investment Corporation, in addition to the New York City Center board. Is that correct, Jeanette?
Absolutely, yep.
Previous boards she's sat on include United Nations Development Corporation, AllianceBernstein Multi-Manager Fund, the Collegiate School, and served as the treasurer and a board member of the Society of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Whew. And in her spare time, which sounds like she has a lot of, she is a founding member of the Wellesley College Business Leadership Council.
That was great. I'm happy to talk about that. That was one of the memorable Wellesley College experiences. But
so that actually, I think, is kind of a good segue for what my first question would be. Could you tell us a little bit about your time and your experience at Wellesley College as a student, and maybe how those experiences, either in the classroom, extracurricular, social, how those influenced your career starting out or over the long term?
Yeah. So, I came to Wellesley without any particular focus as to what I was going to do or what I was going to study. And quite frankly, when I think back about it, we had distribution requirements in those days. I don't know, do you have them still, distribution requirements among the sciences, language, English, humanities? You have them, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And, that was a really good thing because I didn't know what area I would gravitate to. And turned out I did gravitate towards the economics and political science, majored in economics, but I did get to take, courses in art history and, broader history and in some of the other areas in biology. And that actually really, not sure how much I appreciated it at that time, although I enjoyed some of the courses, but I'm grateful that I did have those distribution requirements as I think about my later life and things that I'm now interested in, that those distribution requirements, in essence, gave me exposure to, and frankly, in some cases, I wish I took more of them. But anyway, I went into economics and, I really liked and had an affinity towards that. And one of the most influential aspects of my Wellesley College career was some of my professors in the economics department. I was lucky enough to have Carolyn Shaw Bell, and I don't know if that's still a name that rings bell for your students. But interestingly enough, when we started the Business Leadership Council, it was really small. I guess there were two handfuls, maybe 15 or 20 women from all different ages. And we got together. It was a very small group, and we got together in one little room, and we went around the room to talk about, why we went into the fields that we went into and what were our influences. And it was probably about 75% of the people in that room way back, and you can tell me when that started, probably in the mid 80s, probably 88 or something like that,
Mhm.
who said that one of the greatest influences of their life was Carolyn Shaw Bell. And she was remarkable. I remember I was a Washington intern my junior year. I worked at the Federal Reserve. I worked for one of the governors at the Fed. That was a great experience. There were 15 of us down there in Washington. And, Carolyn Bell suggested that I do this, and I interviewed and was there. It was a great experience and furthered my interest in economics and just what was going on in monetary policy. And by the way, that was the year of Watergate. So it was not only an interesting experience in terms of my job focus, but it was right in the heart of the whole Watergate scandal and trial and so forth. And it was, a great time to be in Washington. But anyway, I worked for Andrew Brimmer, who was one of the governors, and he took me out to lunch at the end of my summer and asked me what I was going to do or what I wanted to do when I graduated from college. And I said, oh, I don't know. I was going into my senior year, and I said, maybe I'll get a PhD in economics. Maybe I'll go to law school. Maybe I'll go to business school. Maybe I'll get a joint degree. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? Go to business school. And so that was my, if you will, push to go to business school. And it was interesting because, Wellesley being an all women's school at that point, we had more economics majors and pre-law people than really any of the other schools had, whether they were co-ed or women's colleges. And Carolyn Bell was the person who said to me, just go for it. You can do whatever you want to do. And it was that kind of support. And it was like, of course, it's not even a discussion item, just apply. So, here I was, I applied to Harvard Business School. I got into Harvard Business School. Just to give you a sense of what business school was like at that point, my class was 95, my section was 95 people, 6 of us were women. And I went to business school directly out of Wellesley. I didn't work. And so there were about 3 people, including men and women, who would come right out of college, if you will, and had no work experience. So I was in this really small minority of people coming right out of college with no work experience, coming from a women's college where there were no men in my classes, and also, being a woman within that whole kind of environment. And so I've got to say it was something of an adjustment in terms of looking at Harvard Business School and going through that whole experience. And then, of course, having had no experience in work, I had no idea what any of the job opportunities were. And you can never get away with this in, probably in the last 20 years, but people were applying to these things called investment banks. My father, by the way, was a doctor, so I did not know what an investment bank was at all. And so I sent a letter in to whoever was on the career services, one of the names that career services had for Goldman Sachs and a bunch of other, investment banks. Didn't understand how somebody who didn't lend money, at that time, the investment banks did not do that, what their raison d'etre was. It was just, kind of interesting. And I got hired by Goldman. And it was interesting because, Carolyn Bell, when I was talking to her, actually, when I was a senior, she had introduced me to a woman named Jan Whitehead, who was a graduate of Wellesley College, an economics major, who also worked at the Fed. Turned out she was then the new wife of John Whitehead, who was the former head of Goldman Sachs. Little did I know at that time that that was who I was introduced to. But anyway, I went to Goldman Sachs. I think that was the first interview I ever had that was outside of an academic experience. So it was, I had no idea what that was going to be like. And I went there for the summer. Talk about a changed environment, if you can imagine, going from Wellesley College to Harvard Business School to Goldman Sachs, which was in essence really like virtually an all-male, pretty aggressive environment. And so it was, it was an interesting transition. And just to give you a sense of, Goldman Sachs was at that point 3,000 people. And I was hired into the research department for the summer. So Lee Cooperman was head of research at the time. If any of you follow Wall Street, you might know who he is. He's went on from being a Goldman partner to being one of the larger hedge fund managers. And but by the end of the summer, the program was so small, there were a total of 4 people, 4 interns from all schools at the entirety of Goldman Sachs. 3 of us from Harvard, 1 from Stanford. And in fact, my class at Harvard, there were 12 from my class at Harvard on the whole street. And so we used to travel as a pack together. It was really, really tiny. And by the end of the summer, I kind of knew everybody at Goldman in the US who were in research, investment banking, and security sales, the equity division. Not so much the fixed income division, but it was that small. And so by the end of the summer, I was allowed to have been around and go around to the different departments. And so I kind of focused in on one of the investment banking departments and got hired for a permanent job at the end of my summer. And the rest is history, as they say. So that's how I got there. It was truly a Forrest Gump kind of thing. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was just lucky and, in terms of landing there, and frankly, in terms of landing in the group that I was in. But I had really very little idea of what investment banking looked like. And as I say that, there was no kind of protocols or role models. And so what I would say is that neither my resume nor my wardrobe really set me up for investment banking, but they hired me anyway. And, it was a terrific experience for me. I was very lucky in terms of the people that I worked with there, because as you can imagine, it was not a female-centric environment at all at Goldman. And in fact, as you mentioned in the intro, I was the first female partner of Goldman in 1986. And I was the only woman in the partnership for 4 years. And the partnership was small. It was about 100 people, including my whole class. And, every time we had a partners meeting, which was every month, I'd go into the meeting and sort of figure out who was I going to sit next to, who would not stop talking immediately as I sat down. And strikingly, it was the merger guys most of all, who were the most receptive and willing and chatty. But it was very much a male environment at the time. But as I was saying, I think a lot of my experience and my good experience was in part because of the people that I worked with. The head of my department was a gentleman by the name of David George, and he was very much an egalitarian merit type of a boss. And so it was quite comfortable. And frankly, a number of the senior people who I worked with and who ran the department. So for example, Steve Friedman, who went on to run Goldman Sachs with Bob Rubin later on, ran my department for a while, and he was, super good about that as well. And frankly, one of my bigger supporters was Hank Paulson, who went on to be Treasury Secretary, and worked a lot with him. And I can only say good things about Hank and what I know about him. And I know he went to Washington really to work on China, and of course Wendy Paulson, his wife, is an alum of Wellesley College, and I think she's a very, I don't know how many of you know her, but she's a very strong and independent-minded woman with great values, and I think married to Hank, he certainly was of a similar mind.
Mhm.
And so, that was very important in terms of my progress through Goldman Sachs. I
Mhm.
probably should stop for a second and see if you had any specifics or
Well, I really appreciate your candor and your honesty about how you kind of arrived in some different areas and how you are kind of making it seem like you really had no idea what you were doing and you kind of arrived at these places. But one thing that definitely stands out in your storytelling is the role that um, mentors and people in your life, people you ended up working with, the role that they have, and your openness to their feedback and your kind of willingness to engage with different people in your network in opening up doors, not necessarily to get you the thing you're looking for, but to open up the idea of, oh, maybe business school is an idea, and maybe that wouldn't have been your path if you hadn't been open to the mentorship or the guidance you were getting from your econ professor here at Wellesley. So I think that's a huge
yeah,
um, lesson for anybody starting out their career or continuing their career, is that be open-minded, use your network, and use the people you have around you, especially during this time at Wellesley. The professors are obviously best in the world, and you're surrounded by other people trying to start their own journey, and just being open to those different ideas is really clearly that helped you, and it led to your successful career. So
yeah.
I really,
Just again, in full transparency, um, there were no real, female mentors at that point. It was, and again, I think one of the questions, or, what I can say is that, in terms of the mentorship that I received, it was really people who had or taken an interest or thought that I could be, um, could advance, or that I did quality work. And um, they were mentorships in the sense that they were opportunities, that they gave me opportunities, and that they gave me, I guess it was support, rather than, I think that there are a lot of programs where there are like assigned mentors and things of that order. I guess I found those to be perhaps a little bit less helpful than the ones that occur naturally. And taking advantage of those is really important. Within the Goldman Sachs partnership, you could not be your own advocate in order to get to the partnership. You really needed the advocacy of well-respected partners within the organization, within the firm,
mhm.
to do that, and to, for whatever reason they wanted to do it. And so between David George, Hank Paulson, and frankly, I worked on some of John Weinberg's accounts as well. Having support of those kinds of people were very important in terms of my advancement, and certainly in terms of my becoming a partner, and becoming a partner when I did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We kind of switching gears a little bit. We talk to students a lot as they're exploring career options, that they should do a lot of introspection about kind of what their values are and kind of what their personal strengths are, their characteristics, kind of
Yeah.
how they like to spend their time. How have you, how has that kind of been a part of your career journey? How have you identified different strengths or weaknesses, and how have you kind of managed that on your career journey and
Yeah.
grown through those experiences?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, different stages of your career, different strengths and weaknesses, come up and play different roles. I was always very analytical and a very hard worker, and, had a tremendous amount of persistence. And so those were the attributes that really helped me a lot, in the formative years, or in the early years. And then as I went along in my career, different things started to have greater import, and not necessarily the same kinds of things that that helped me in the earlier part of my career. And this is sort of some of the lessons learned. So as I went on in my career, as I got more senior, as I was a partner, and as I had to or wanted to make decisions or take stands, as I was, on something, and where it might not be a consensus view. And this is an aside. I certainly read Sheryl Sandberg's book about leaning in and the importance of it. But and that really starts to play a bigger role as you get more senior, and you are, in a position where you have to express your views. But one thing I learned, and it was a lesson, if you will, is that if you're going to take some stands, and if you're going to, as you get senior, that you got to, if you're going to do something that's, or say something that's maybe controversial, particularly in as testosterone type of organization as some of the financial services, that you really have to be prepared to, to take it all the way. You can't go part way and then stop. It's sort of like you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You really have to go all the way. And if you're not, then don't start that. Don't start that. In terms of earlier on, just in terms of what I found valuable as I was a senior person looking at the more junior people, I always found that the young people, what made someone a really good employee and a valuable member, if they did what they had to do and did it timely, did it accurately, that was all great. But I really value the young people who also were insightful about what they were doing and would feel comfortable and bring up in a very, in a, I guess, a very appropriate way, any kind of thoughts that they had. And frankly, I found a lot of the young people and the junior people who were like that were immensely valuable. And it was also a predictor of, of their success as they went on. And so I would say that was certainly something that, that I would say on the earlier side of things that I would point to in terms of, a strength. Don't be afraid to, to provide your opinion, to provide, a point of view. You might be wrong, but it's really valuable, and you'll, I think you get credit for that sort of thing.
And how would you, for a student that maybe doesn't have that kind of mentality right now, is there a way that, do you remember earlier in your career when you had some moments like that either didn't go well or did go well, that kind of inspired you to keep going or change the way you were approaching, kind of learning moments from that early career time?
So obviously there were many times that, where many things didn't go well. I can even remember one of the first transactions that I was doing as a partner, where I was committing capital of the firm, and it was like really going down, and very, very concerned about it. But persistence, resilience was really an important aspect of it. It's the concept of, being able to push through, to have an attitude of yes, we can, to have the attitude of one door closes, another door opens, and to be thoughtful in those ways. It's, and by the way, that I would say is applicable, whether it's in finance, whether it's in whatever you're in, having that attitude and being able to, to look at the world in that way is super important, and will put you way ahead, because it's really easy when things are down to look at the world and to look at what you're doing and, to see the glass half full or even a quarter full, and just, not being able to figure out how you're going to get out of this or what you're going to do. But I think that resilience and that attitude, which I've got to say is not natural for me. I have to work at that. But I think that that really is a very important determinant. And if you don't have it naturally, developing that is, will hold you in very good stead. And it is hard to change your nature, but that's, working at those sorts of things are very important if you can do it.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point, that persistence and resilience and this idea of grit, which is kind of a newer term, but a version of that. It's a myth that just some people have it and some people don't. And the people that have it from birth are the ones that are going to get through. I think, like you said, if you don't have it, find opportunities to practice it. Get knocked down, raise your hand in class, raise your hand introduce yourself to somebody in a networking opportunity, and get those opportunities and go through that process. And that's how you can build those qualities and those traits.
I'm not going to say that it's it is true in all cases, but a generalization was that, at least in way back, that, women were more hesitant and concerned about being wrong and didn't want to be wrong and took it personally. And men were, much more would divorce that from themselves. It wasn't a reflection of themselves. And certainly being in a very male environment, you could see that there was that difference. And so for me, it was something of a challenge. And there were many days that I had to, talk to myself and, have a mantra, about, just about that, the grit of, holding your position and making your point and, and finding your way forward. So it was very important. Other things, I guess, that were, lessons or things that were important as I learned, and these are just sort of random thoughts, the importance of networks, of enlarging your network as much as you can. And it's a job. It may not be a natural thing for you, but it is very helpful to have a network. And in part, having a network also means where you can and where you've got expertise and where you can be helpful, being helpful to people. Because if you're helpful to people, then they will feel more obligated to be helpful to you, or you can call on them for little favors or big favors or what have you. So again, depending on where your strengths are, I know all the wealthy women are very analytical and super intelligent and super bright, but that aspect of a friendly network and reaching out and broadly reaching out, and you never know where you're going to need help or want help and what you can do for others, that is something as well, I guess, a point to work on or to work at.
Yeah, that we in the career education office preach that same sermon all the time, that the network can be super valuable, and it's oftentimes the most efficient way for people to learn about an industry or to learn about opportunities. And just like the kind of persistence, grit, resilience area, it is something that the more you do it, the more comfortable you will become with the networking, and kind of it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, a virtuous cycle. So yeah, the networking.
I would say it's also not only something when you start your career, but as you continue to move on up, because, in this interconnected world, having a broad network and having, having people to go to, whether it's for a referral, whether it's for an introduction, not even things that are necessarily big things, but just the breadth of that is really kind of important. And I would say that for women, having that not only with other women, but having it broadly within the male community as well, which is tougher it's tougher for women to do that. But again, there are so many men who are in positions of, whether it's seniority or just where they are. I think having that broad network and moving it throughout your career is something that I would say is important and helpful in terms of to moving forward, particularly for women, and not necessarily a natural thing.
Yeah, certainly. So I was hoping to switch gears slightly, and I think a lot of the students on the call would be interested to hear your thoughts on the state of the market, both from your perch as a CEO and also in your role on the boards of very large financial instruments and kind of that perspective. And in addition to kind of like the current state of affairs and what you see going on and the influences that are kind of shaping the market right now, and maybe how that's changed over time, how do you keep yourself updated and current? Kind of what resources do you use? How frequently? What medium? What's good? What's something you don't really pay that much attention to?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Look, you hear every day about what people think, where the markets are going, the economy's going, and I think that there's a lot of speculation and nobody really knows what's going to happen. We all know, that we've got a hot economy, that that there's a lot of inflation, that it's across the board, and I see it in terms of pet care and some of the other aspects, and interest rates rising, inflation, labor shortages, wage labor increases, supply chain disruptions, just across the board. And how this is all going to sort out, I don't, I'm not a good prognosticator on this as to what's going to happen. I think if you turn on CNBC, every day you'll hear all the different aspects of it, and you can see just how quickly things can change. You can see that during the pandemic, certain kinds of companies were, very hot as you got into these stay-at-home kind of stocks, whether it was, as you've seen, everybody's seen what's been going on with Netflix and, and Peloton and even Zoom and, some of the others. And now the airlines are, doing better, and they're staffed, and housing prices. So there are just, so many different variables occurring at this point in time. It's interesting to see on the financial side, on the two public boards that I sit on Apollo and Alliance Bernstein. Alliance Bernstein, I see a whole mix of different types of assets. Their equities, their international, their debt, and they really do move around quite a bit. And you see the whole variety of them. Apollo is really more of a credit fund, if you will, and it's interesting. Apollo has a new CEO, a guy named Mark Rowan. He comes at it from a certain direction in terms of insurance and really on the credit side, even more than on the equity side. So you can see that influencing the directions in which they are going. And he's a very smart guy, and I think he's taking it into to very interesting areas. In terms of particulars, basically, it certainly starts with the Wall Street Journal in the mornings, and certainly CNBC, and then really just a range of the different research folks who are out there, just a range of them. One thing I would say is just how much finance is changing, and particularly, the banks. Just being part of a younger company, what I see also is just the the whole dynamics of the growth of fintech and, the different aspects of it. I'm amazed and struck by, by the banks versus some of the new financial companies that are out there. The banks really, relate more to very established kinds of companies, maintain their credit rules. They are much more regulated. It feels very different than some of the younger companies who are really taking, very different views of things. And that's a very big area and a growing area. And, you can see the strength of those areas. The other thing, again, I'm struck by is just how things flip on a dime. Until January of this year, growth at any cost was the mantra. And people spent a tremendous amount of money in order to grow the top line revenues, and then to hope that their business models will over time become profitable. And the market rewarded them for that. And that is, that has really turned, particularly in the public markets now, where, cash flow, still growth, but it's not growth at any cost. So lots of different changes, and so many different things are emerging.
Yeah, I think that especially that your point about the kind of overlap between technology and the financial services sector and kind of the melding of the two is an interesting dynamic, and also creates a lot of opportunities for students who are kind of started with technology, started with this kind of ingrained in their thinking. I think that creates opportunities for students right now to jump into the financial services market and not have to worry. Kind of, they speak that language that a lot of the banks are now trying to build into their own DNA. So I think that creates an opportunity.
The other thing I would say about technology, at least from my own observation, is being able to meld technology and marketing, or technology with other things. Technology has, infiltrated all aspects of business, and it's not necessarily just a silo by itself. That the crossover between technology and other aspects is increasingly important. Data science doesn't exist, or it doesn't stand in a silo by itself. It really is in conjunction with the whole business model. And again, having that kind of an affinity, I think, is going to be an increasingly valuable skill, and give you, in fact, greater breadth across a whole variety of different industries. Within my own company at this point, the technology people and the marketing people sit together, and they operate together because they are so integrated.
Yeah, thinking of them as two separate departments is no longer relevant necessarily. So before we get in, I think we're about ready to switch over to some student questions. So this is going to be a little heads up warning for our students who have questions. I just want to ask you one more thing. What would be your recommendation to all these lovely students for the thing not to miss out on, or what you wish you had not missed out on during your 4 years at Wellesley?
Okay, well, so at least in my starting career at Goldman, while it was helpful to be an economics major because, it got me my first position, if you will, or my summer job, I can just tell you that from Goldman in their hiring, it really didn't matter what your major was, that they were really looking at the individual and not really necessarily that you were an economics major. We had plenty of art history majors who came, and English majors and history majors and science majors and so forth. So, I guess I wouldn't get necessarily, or at least in those days, I don't know how that's changed, but that was not necessarily the, the prerequisite in those days in terms of finance. I guess if I go back to where I started, I was grateful that we had distribution requirements. And frankly, if I look back on it, I would have liked to have taken more art history and maybe some more music courses, which at the time were enjoyable to me, but I didn't appreciate how much that would matter to me later on in life. And also, I'd say history as well. Again, not so much in terms of my work life, but in terms of just my, overall life. I think some of those were really important, and I think I benefited from them, and I would certainly, again, urge you to take a broad array of courses because it's a great opportunity. And the professors were all so interesting, and the materials were also important and good. So,
I don't think you're in need of any more college credits, but I'm sure we could arrange for you to audit a couple art history
I
classes.
would love it. Yeah, I would love it. I would just love it. I think I only took 3 or 4 courses, but
Yeah.
it was, and probably it would benefit from some of the music courses because I didn't take enough of those.
What kind of music, if you could choose any kind of music course, what would it be?
I would probably at this point go back to some of the fundamentals of it. I played the piano. In fact, one of the things, as a first-year associate, we used to do a Christmas show, and so I was an associate. I think I had that I played the piano, on my resume, and so when it came time for the song and dance numbers, I was the pianist. And in fact, who was part of the talent? Phil Murphy, who's now the governor of New Jersey, because he can sing. He's a showman. He's almost like Hugh Jackman. I got to tell you, that guy is really, is a performer.
Wow, I'll have to look up a YouTube video of him.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I don't know if your book that you're reading now had even John Weinberg in it. He dressed up in a bumblebee outfit, it was from Saturday Night Live. He got the Saturday Night Live bumblebee outfit. And he was in the show as well.
See, now we're getting into the good stuff. We can now this is the next part of the programming when we talk about all the behind the scenes of your Goldman career. So before we get too far into that, I want to now kick it over to students. We have a bunch of students still on. So Destiny, how should we manage this? Do you have any questions that anyone IM'd you, or do we want to just open it up generally?
So there is a question that did come through to me to the chat, so we can start there and I'll share it, and then other students can either use the chat function to share questions, or if you want to use the raised hand function, that is good as well. So Emily had asked, when you think about your time at Goldman kind of initially, and now what you know about the company today, are there some ways that you might share that you think it has changed? And then there was a second part to her question, which is, as the kind of industry looks today in terms of the landscape, what do you think makes Goldman stand out within investment banking?
Right. Well, Goldman, so when I was started at Goldman, we were 3,000 people total. It's now 30,000 people, maybe even more. We had offices other than the US offices, and we had offices in New York, San Francisco, LA, Dallas, a bunch of places, Boston, in New York, in the US. But we had an office in London, we had an office in Tokyo, and that was pretty much it internationally. And now if you look at Goldman, it has expanded worldwide. It's got offices, everywhere. So it is, globally, a far, far different place. The kinds of things that Goldman does is like, so different. it was quite narrow in my day. You know, as I went on in my career, they did branch out. So for example, we were really did investment banking, mergers and acquisitions. We did IPOs. We did, debt transactions, some security sales, research, a number of those, very core products. But as life went on, they started to do more using their own capital, and that's one of the things that really caused it to go public, rather than to rely on the partners' capital, which was, number one, somewhat limited, as well as at risk. It was individually at risk. In fact, all of our capital, when you became a partner at Goldman in those days, all your capital was at risk. They gave you a draw, an 8% draw on your capital, and that's what you got, but everything else stayed in the firm. And so, when there were losses, it was your losses, very directly. I can remember anecdotally, one of my first partner meetings, there's a Bob Mnuchin, who's a senior trading partner of the firm, father of Steve Mnuchin, who was also a Goldman Sachs guy and became a treasury secretary. But he used to have a saying that said, volatility is good. And it was a great saying until about, after about 3 different months of substantial losses in some of the trading departments, somebody raised their hand and said, Bob, I thought you said volatility was good. And his response is, yeah, but you got to know which way the volatility is going, which apparently we did not at that point in time. But, what has happened now, and it's interesting because I think this started under Lloyd Blankfein, but has really been, much more prevalent under David Solomon. And it's the when I was at Goldman traded at a multiple of its, of its net worth. It was trading on that basis. Over time, that really changed, and it didn't get that kind of a premium on its stock, on its equity. And talking to David Solomon, who's now the head of Goldman Sachs, his response to the whole thing was, people like JP Morgan and some of the big banks had surpassed Goldman on its metrics. And his comment was, Goldman had been strong in a couple of areas. They were strong in institutional, they were strong with sovereigns, and they were strong with high net worth companies, with individuals. But where was the bulk of the money? The bulk of the money was really in retail, and that you could not be compensated enough, and we couldn't get the premium because we were too narrowly focused, if you will, on those traditional categories. And that's what we've seen is the development now in terms of where Goldman is going. It has spent a ton of money going into Marcus and going into the retail sector and trying to do it from the point of view of its strength. So it's not going to start branch networks, but it is trying to go into direct banking and direct money management with, with where the bulk of the money is. May not be as concentrated, because that's what we used to do, is really focus on the very concentrated pools. But there's so much of the money that's in the hands of consumers that the feeling was, in order to, to continue and to expand the value of Goldman Sachs, the value to shareholders, the value to employees, that you've got to go where the money is. And so that has been one major really development that they've spent a lot of time and money on. The other thing was appreciation for recurring revenues. And this is not just in the, within finance, but I think it's, prevalent in a lot of different industries. And Goldman had traditionally been more transactionally focused and a little less on recurring revenues, and that would be more in the asset management area. And so you've seen, a bigger push to do fee type of recurring revenue asset management kinds of expansions. And so in addition to its, traditional lines of business, which it is still a leader in, whether it's in M&A and IPOs and, providing trusted advice, it has really moved and morphed in a couple of different areas. In fact, here's something historical. When I started at Goldman, we had an asset management division. They sold that division while I was at Goldman, my earliest years, because they felt it was a conflict with, some of their other businesses, which were more advisory, corporate advisory and other kinds of businesses where we represented the companies. So they sold it off only to restart it, still while I was at Goldman in another 10 or 15 years later. And now it's really taken on, much more significance, both using the firm's own capital, but also raising a lot of outside capital, both for private equity, other kinds of special situations, asset management kinds of functions, and really trying to look a lot more like a BlackRock or a Blackstone in certain aspects of it. So it's gone into those areas. And by the way, if you look at like where, Blackstone started, where Apollo started, they started in private equity. And it was, doing leverage buyouts and things of that order. If you look at these companies today, they too have really moved very dramatically so that they are now, look at Apollo now, and a lot of these, they're credit funds. They're all focused on credit and debt and asset management, again, on the fee aspect of it. But the private equity side, which is what it's, historically known for, is a much smaller portion of the overall businesses than they were, way back when they started.
Yeah, that's an interesting, it's definitely come a long way, and it's definitely still a central player. So it will be interesting to see over the next 10 years how the landscape changes, and the students on the call now will be kind of on the ground in 10 years, thinking back to this moment, saying, well, I thought it had changed so much and it was just going to kind of be the same. I think that's one thing that we all, as in our own careers, think that, oh, this moment right now, everything's going to kind of just, the landscape's going to look this way for the next 10, 15, 20 years, but it just changes beneath your feet the whole time.
It changes, and with that comes opportunity. So you can, the other thing is you don't know where you're going to be in 10 years from now. You can go in starting in one area and, and frankly, you don't know, as you don't know where that will lead to or where you will be taken. I remember when I started, people really didn't move around a lot. You were in investment banking, you were in a certain department or division, and you pretty much stayed there. Then, even during my tenure, it started to become that people had, international. They were being moved to international spots so that a lot of people had international experience. Mm-hmm. And now you can just see that, it's also just huge amount of changes in terms of moving people around, from one division to another. And it's funny because you don't know whether a career move is going to be a good one or a bad one, but I think you got to be open to listen and to, to be flexible and to, embrace change.
That's a great message. Embrace change for sure.
Yep.
Destiny, any other written in questions, or should we open it up to the students that are on the line still?
We can open it up to students who are on the line. We're getting close to time. So if there is someone who wants to ask a kind of question to take us out, that would be great.
It looks like we have a question from Naomi. The floor is yours.
All right, it sounds good. I guess I should introduce myself first. Hi, my name is Naomi. I'm a current first year double majoring in economics and Chinese. Oh, wow. Thank you so much for taking your time. Thank you so much for taking your time out of the day So sorry, what did you say?
I said that's impressive.
Oh, thank you. That means so much coming from you. Oh my God. I really appreciate you coming out to talk to us today. My question is, how do you think your Wellesley education prepared you for your position at Goldman and what you do now?
Well, I don't know if there, you know what? I'll tell you, part of it is, of course, I have a continuing interest in economics. And so that is quite, enmeshed, if you will, in what's happening in the world. But I think probably as important as anything else in terms of being formative was some of the advice and the direction that I got from some of my professors. And again, I go back to Carolyn Bell and also Marshall Goldman. And there was a woman named Maureen Crandall, they were all in the economics department. I got really quite close to that group of professors. And it was the attitude that they had and the direction that they had that really were very formative in terms of where I was going, and gave me that, that, if you will, that push that I didn't even know they were doing at that point in time, because I didn't know any better. It was of course, and it was very matter of fact. And by the way, the other thing, just in terms of, this didn't necessarily, affect my business career, but I have friends from my days at Wellesley that are still my good friends today. And those friendships are very meaningful and very important to me. And it's funny, you may not see someone for a year, 2 years, or whatever, lose touch, and then you get together and it's like you've never been apart. There's that great feeling that you have towards people. But Wellesley was for me, because I guess I came into college not that worldly at all. And I think it was a great transition and set me up for the things that I did, and really gave me the point of view that I didn't think about how I was going to feel about going to Harvard Business School and being one of 6 women in my section. I didn't really think about going to Goldman and being so outnumbered by it. It was a very it was enriching experience, but it was a very emboldening kind of experience. But it did require transitions as I went along my career, and a lot of lessons learned. It's very interesting because when I was in all of those positions, there were very few women throughout my career at Goldman, and certainly at Harvard as well. So it was it was very different than what the mix is. In fact, it's a funny thing. So when David Solomon, this is anecdotally, when David Solomon became head of Goldman, and it was, he joined Goldman from Bear Stearns in like 1999. I was already gone. So I never knew David when he was, at Gold. I never met him. But the first week that he became the CEO, he called me up and he said, why don't you come down and join me for lunch? Okay, just, me and David and John Rogers, who's chief of staff, who, is like John Rogers, just to give you some sense, he's been everybody's chief of staff since Hank Paulson. So he is like the survivor of all survivors, for every one of the CEOs. So he said to me, so went down to lunch, it was very nice, and we were sitting there. And so David said to me, you were the first woman partner. I did want to meet you. And in fact, I would have, introduced myself to him at, one of the, partner dinners. But he said, it is important, to have women. We believe that women should, be an important part of our leadership. And we have to take a different view. We can't look at, our traditional and only the way we did things in the past and continue to do things. He said, for example, the commitments committee at Goldman generally is determined by your position, by positions, head of this department, head of that department, et cetera, et cetera. He said, if we continue that, all you're going to do is see, the same male heads, because, it takes a while to move women, to move people up. And so we said, we're going to take a whole different look at things. I'm going to say, for example, head of strategy. He said, I put out the word that I want the best woman for that position, because it can't be the more traditional way of doing things, because it won't cause change. You've got to have a different lens on things. And so he said, I have 2 daughters. I think he said 2 daughters. He doesn't have sons. And he said, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And so he said, I feel very strongly about it. And it was and then he said to me, you were the first woman partner and we should celebrate that. And so he said, I'd like to have a conference room dedicated to you at Goldman. We're going to have a big party, a big celebration, not a luncheon. And, I was kind of, didn't really sit well with me, or, it was not something I really wanted to do. But he said, it would be really important. So actually, if you ever go to Goldman and you go to the floor where the conference rooms are, like the 42nd floor, whatever it is, at West Street, there you'll see it's this humongous conference room. I don't know what in the world they do with it. And there's a photo of me and a plaque, which, was the importance of celebrating women in the firm and where they should be and where their firm is going and how they felt about it. So at least from David Solomon's point of view, it's, it was also a challenge. And if you look at what he's done, if you look at the last group of partners, I think around 50% or so of them are women. And of course, they come from all over the world now. So it's a much, much more diversified, partner pool. And I think, he and the partnership committee and the partnership are really taking a broader view of it and looking at not just the old boys network, but making sure that women have the opportunities to shine and to be spotlighted. And in fact, even when I go back to my old days, I look at some of the assignments that I got and that I had, and I don't think it wasn't, as studied as it is now. But I worked with, John Weinberg on some of his accounts. And Casey, as you said, I worked on Jimmy Weinberg's, which is Sidney Jr.'s accounts. Hughes Aircraft was one of them. Howard Hughes, crazy situation then. Yeah. But also, some things with Steve Friedman and definitely with Hank Paulson. I did a lot of stuff with Hank. And that was, that was important because it number one, spotlighted me. It gave me visibility to senior people, and you do a good job, and you are, always do a good job for the people who are, make the people ahead of you look really good. That's kind of an important aspect of what you're doing. But again, it was the ability or being spotlighted or having the visibility that was, important in terms of the career. And David, for one, is really spotlighting it.
I think that's a really hopeful and positive and encouraging message to end on for students that are thinking about going after a career in investment banking, which we know is still very competitive and very intense career. Yeah. I
want to just also, one other observation. So, the investment banks like Goldman Sachs and so forth, they hire, people right out of college, right? And for the analyst programs.
Yep.
The firms like Apollo and, Blackstone and some of those, the private equity firms generally, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, you're in career services, do not. And so what they do is they look at that first, they look at the analysts that are in the investment banks, because they will hire both from business schools, but they will also hire from that analyst group. And so you'll find that, word gets out, and, the analysts at Goldman and the other firms get poached early on in their analyst programs within the first year. I assume it's still going to be the same, by some of the other PE firms and others. So there is the full career at Goldman, and staying there and going up the ladder at Goldman, but it is also a immensely good springboard for other financial services companies. And if you look at where that whole group has gone and where they spread out to, they really spread out pretty broadly. And so again, they go to other financial services companies, but then they do a whole lot of other things. And it's a great network of people, because they're all, super smart, super dedicated, super, involved. And it's a great network as it matures within Goldman, but as it expands and diversifies outside of it.
Yeah, it is definitely a phenomenal training ground, career starting point, and it's still, that dynamic still exists with the PE firms and some of those other firms poaching from that analyst class, and that's still kind of a tried and true career path. Jeanette, I think the conference room renaming was well-deserved, to say the least. And
I always say it's my 15 minutes of fame. Andy Warhol said that it was, you get 15 minutes. And so.
Well, I think you deserve much more than 15 minutes. You are truly a trailblazer and an inspiration to the students, to myself, to the staff here, to the students that we have here today, and to the students that are coming through the doors all the time. So really, truly thank you for taking time out of your obviously busy day to talk to us and share some of your career journey with us. And I hope this is not the last of our conversations, and that we can continue to engage on students interested in careers in finance and more. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all good luck. And I'm sure you will have huge numbers of opportunities, because I know that all the qualities and strengths of the Wellesley class is excellence and as good as any out there. So I know that you guys will all have interesting and rewarding careers, and hopefully in finance.
You're here. Jeanette, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and take care.
Have a great day.
Thank you.